The Kremlin-backed Russian official is the favourite candidate to become president of the global law enforcement agency, Interpol. Alexander Prokopchuk is the lead candidate, expected to be the top pick in the bid when member states vote later today. Kremlin critics are warning this morning that his election would allow Moscow to use the post to hunt down its detractors. Moscow, however, rejects those claims, saying their attempts to interfere with the vote. Well, the appointment has brought international condemnation. Let's take a look at some of the tweets that we're seeing from the EU. Guy Verhofstadt says that Russia has consistently misused Interpol to pursue its own political opponents. And then in the UK, Dominic Raab, the former Brexit secretary, urged his government to act. Then we had Andrew Stolheim, who is with Human Rights Watch, warning with a history lesson. And finally, the Russian embassy in the US saying that senators are meddling with Interpol's election. Well, let's have a listen to what some prominent figures had to say about that.
Would she not accept that if this gentleman were to succeed in his election, this would be a massive propaganda victory for the Putin regime, just ahead of a vote in the European Union on fresh sanctions? Would it, in effect, not amount to accepting that Interpol has become a branch of the Russian mafia?
And to put his representative in charge of the most important international crime-fighting organization is like putting the mafia in charge, and that will only lead to bad things going forward for crime-fighting and victims of the Putin regime.
In such an institution, Lithuania would have to rethink its membership.
Well, let's stay with this story, and Alistair Stanford joins me now in the studio. Good morning to you, Alistair.
Good morning, Belle.
Just tell us a little bit more about this favourite Russian candidate.
Yes, well, who is he? He's Alexander Prokopchuk. He is a senior figure in the Russian Police and Interior Ministry. For the last 7 years, he's headed the NCB, that's Interpol's Russian bureau. It's the main point of contact between the country and Interpol. Interpol, of course, is the international criminal police organization. It shares intelligence. It leaves investigations and arrests up to national forces, but it can issue these red notices, which are in effect international arrest warrants. The president's job is said to be largely ceremonial, but it is influential nonetheless. Critics say that Prokopchuk has been instrumental in Russian attempts to abuse the system, in particular targeting opponents of the Kremlin abroad. Now, Interpol has strengthened its legal framework around these red notices, but the accusation is that countries like Russia, and China incidentally, see Interpol largely as an agency, not as the rule of law, but of power, hence this deluge of hostility towards this potential appointment. And
what about the Kremlin? Has there been any response to all of this international criticism?
Yes, there has. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, has been speaking, accusing the US senators, who've been very critical over this, of trying to interfere in the electoral process of an international organization, and saying that they very much back the Russian candidate. Kremlin-backed media such as Russia Today have commented also, saying the senators have no concrete examples, blaming them, saying they're known for their hawkish views, for their anti-Russian agenda, saying they regularly attack President Putin, and blaming what they call hysteria in the mainstream media. Now, Bill Browder, who we heard from then, his case is a perfect illustration of the clash over Interpol. He's a UK-based Kremlin critic. He says that Russia has made several attempts to arrest him. He, of course, led the drive for sanctions against Russian officials via the Magnitsky Act. Sergei Magnitsky was his employee, a lawyer who claimed to have uncovered huge tax fraud by Russian officials, and he died in a Russian prison in 2009. A Russian investigation said he'd been beaten and denied medical care. Russia has launched new charges against Bill Browder, saying it's highly likely he was behind the poisoning of Magnitsky. Now, he says this is a sham, and this is the charge of Kremlin critics. They say that the simple reason for their going after Bill Browder is that he's been a thorn in the side of the Kremlin for years. That's the reason they're going after him. That's why a Russian head of Interpol would be such a threat.